Good morning. Today is Sunday, November 2nd, 2025. I did not get a chance to share this with you last week. It relates to yesterday's Torah portion, but I think it's a very important topic. There was a narrative in yesterday's Torah portion in Lech Lecha about two armies that were fighting against each other. There was 4 kings against 5 kings, and it had nothing to do with Avraham, but they captured Sodom and they took Lot as a prisoner, as a captive. Lot was Avraham's nephew. So Avraham gathered his soldiers and went after that army, and he was able to defeat that army, and he was able to retrieve Lot and bring him home. So after that happens, we meet Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the king of his region. And Melchizedek gives a blessing to Avraham and praises Avraham, makes a meal for Avraham, which we discussed before. And then the Torah says, in return, Vayitein lo Maaser mikol. And Avraham gives Melchizedek 1/10 of all his possessions. The word, that is the first usage of the word Maaser in the Torah. The word Maaser, comes from the word eser, which means 10, number 10. So Maaser is 1/10. In English, that word is tithing, which also means to take 1/10, usually within the context of charity. Now, this Maaser, in our Torah portion, and later in the Torah, where this is given as an agricultural mitzvah to farmers when they come into Israel, this is not what we understand to be tzedaka, or charity, but rather, this is the way that God envisions that public servants should be supported. So it would be better to call it a flat tax. A flat tax supporting the people and the institutions that the public needs. In the words of one commentary, V'shomrei mishmeres Hashem, those who are protecting the goals of Hashem, the values of God, yiyu pnuyim medagas hamizonos, they should be free from having to worry about finding food. If you're spending your day teaching Torah to other people, you should be able to have an income. If you're working in the Beis HaMikdash, like the Leviim, the Levites, or the Kohanim, the priests, so you have to be able to feed your family. So there were certain gifts that were given. And Maaser is when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, and they were largely an agricultural society. So each farmer, when they took in their crops, they would give 10% to the Levi, 2% to the Kohen, 10% to the Levi, in order to support them. Because the Leviim, in addition to serving in the Beit HaMikdash in the Holy Temple, they were also the teachers and the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people. So, in other words, again, Maaser is a flat tax system to support those in necessary, legitimate public service. That's not tzedakah. That's tax for public services. If you want public services here, if you want police, if you want your garbage picked up, if you want teachers in public schools, so that's why we pay taxes. Later, our rabbis borrowed this word Maaser, and they borrowed the amount of 1/10 as a guideline for our personal tzedakah. one should give 1/10 of all of their earnings, all the money that comes to them, to Tzedaka, to a charitable cause. In our society, many questions come up in figuring out how much to give and to whom to give it. So let me just share the rough guidelines. They go as follows. The recommendation is 10% of net income from any source. It could be earnings, it could be a gift, it could be inheritance, it could be anything. But it is net income. That means you take the figure after you've paid taxes and after you've paid for whatever is a legitimate business expense it took to earn that money. What remains, you take 10% and give to Tzedaka. What is a legitimate business expense? So Rav Moshe Feinstein says, here, we simply rely on the government of the place that we live. So, if the CRA would recognize this expense as a legitimate business expense, then you can claim it on your Maaser totals. And if not, not. To whom should you give Tzedaka or Maaser? So the first thing to say is, it is at your discretion. Every person has the right to choose what's important to them, who they want to support, what they want to support, what they don't want to support. It's up to each individual to decide that. It is preferable for your own spiritual growth, for my own spiritual growth, to try and to never say no to anyone who asks for money, at least for some small amount. Excuse me. Whatever is a small amount to you, $1, whatever it is. To be able to never say no to someone who asks for help, that is a level of piety that a person should try to achieve. Not everybody can do that. But if you can do that, it's worthwhile. It is permitted and in fact recommended to look into a recipient before giving a larger amount. And again, what a larger amount is subjective. But to make sure that there is a genuine, legitimate need. You can look into it and commit and assure yourself that this is something that is legitimate. Among the various recipients, Tzedaka or Maaser can be considered to be given in two categories, A and B. A is what I would call primary Tzedaka, and this is money that is given to those who are hungry, for those who do not have shelter or clothing, for a person that has immediate need due to their poverty. I call that primary tzedakah. That's category A. Then there's category B, secondary tzedakah. Secondary tzedakah means supporting important causes and institutions. Supporting a synagogue, Jewish schools, organizations like the Federation CJA and other organizations that do important work. That is what I would call secondary tzedakah. A person should try to have a diversified recipient allocation so that some is going to each of the categories, but it is up to each person to decide how much to allocate for each category. It is preferable to give more to category A, excuse me, I'm sorry. It it is preferable to give more to category A, primary tzedakah, and to give a little bit less to the secondary tzedakah, the institutions and the organizations. But again, it's your choice. Within each category, it is preferred to start with those that are closest to you. So the first layer would be your own family, then your relatives, then your neighborhood, then your city, and then anyone else. And giving to people who are poor in Jerusalem is on the same level as giving to people who are poor in your own city. And this should include the non-Jewish world, because the mitzvah of tzedakah is fulfilled by giving to non-Jewish individuals and non-Jewish organizations. And so that should be part of the allocation. Of course, it's up to you to decide what percentage. If you give, let's say, $1,000 to tzedakah, and you get back $500 as a tax deduction, then you can only consider $500 as your Maaser amount. In other words, we look at the net gift that you're giving. Today in our society, there may be certain expenses, certain donations that may qualify, let's say in Canada, that may qualify for a tax benefit, but they are definitely not considered tzedakah or Maaser. For example, now I'm not an expert on any of these details, but in some places, a person will get a tax rebate if they buy an electric car. Or personal medical expenses under certain circumstances can provide a tax benefit. Or if you make a donation to an organization like a museum or an orchestra or another nonprofit organization, those might meet the CRA requirements for a tax-deductible donation, but they are not considered tzedakah. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that Maaser, the idea, the mitzvah to give 10% of your income to those in need, also compels designating at least 10% of your time to help those in need. And often, the 10% of the time that you spend helping others often could be more valuable than the actual money. There is no specific time to give tzedakah or Maaser. It's up to you. You could decide to give today. You could decide to give tomorrow. But it is necessary to keep records. So you need to keep track of how much comes in and how much you've given. And it is a good suggestion to have a Maaser fiscal year. For example, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So before Rosh Hashanah comes, a person tallies up what their income is and tallies up how much they've given to Maaser and make sure that they have distributed the rest of the Maaser that is due for that year before Rosh Hashanah. Although you can choose a different system. You could choose to give on a monthly basis or every 2 years, whatever you decide to do. But it should be, you should keep records. You should make sure to give what you plan to give within that amount of time. And you should think about the recipients, not just, whatever you get in the mail or whoever comes to your door, but I think it's right for a person to think in advance. How much do I want to allocate to this? And how much do I want to allocate to that? Eli Wiesel tells the story of a great Hasidic master, Rav Naftali of Rupchitz. And one time, It was Shabbos HaGadol, the great Shabbos, the Shabbos before Pesach, when it is common for rabbis to give a lecture and for many, many people to come. So 1 year of Natalia Rabchitz devoted his talk to tzedakah, to giving tzedakah. When he came home from the synagogue, he fell into his chair. He was exhausted. So his wife asked him, how did it go? Did you succeed in convincing them? And with a smile he answered, I only half succeeded. And that's not bad. I convinced the poor to receive, but I did not yet convince the rich to give. Joseph Gruss is a very important individual in the Jewish world. A very generous philanthropist and a very knowledgeable, Jewishly knowledgeable person. And he used to quote this. During the Spanish Inquisition, so of course, they confiscated everything that belonged to Jews. During the Spanish Inquisition, the king summoned the richest Jew and asked to see his balance sheet. His answer was, what I gave, I have. And what I have, I lost. Finally, a line from the Talmud. The Gemara Masechta Sukkah says as follows. The value of the gift of tzedakah depends on the amount of chesed it includes. Ein tzedakah mishtalemes el lefi chesed sheba. Doesn't depend on how much money you give. It depends with how much kindness and compassion and empathy and not being condescending and not being rude. But that is what determines the value of the mitzvah that you performed. It's not the amount. It's the way you give it. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.